Well, broke means living like scrap to scrap, paycheck to paycheck, not knowing how to get out from underneath debt that you've acquired, not knowing where your next dollar is going to come from. That's broke. And I lived that life for a really long time.
Welcome to Living
Not
Not
So
So
Fabulously,
Fabulously.
where financial freedom means swapping starving artist shame for producer level control of your life. Travis Shakespeare is an award-winning director and producer of shows such as Ice Road Truckers and documentaries like Playing with Fire about the financial independence, retire early movement.
From broke, starving artist to debt to financial freedom and creative success, Travis has lived the money highs and lows many of us only see in the movies.
Welcome to the show, Travis.
Thanks. Good to see you guys.
Awesome to have you. So we want to dive right into a very curious story. Please tell us about the story of your grandmother and the silver dollar that you received when you were, I believe, 7.
But yeah, you asked me what my first money story is, and that was it. So when I was about 7 years old, my grandmother on my mom's side, who I just absolutely adored, grandma, um, she had gone to Las Vegas, and I had never been there, but like I had seen pictures, and I had like the jingling of slot machines in my head from seeing Vegas in the movies and whatnot. And she came back and she gave me a silver dollar that she said she won in a slot machine. So this silver dollar had this like magical quality to it because it was imbued with the love of grandma and also Vegas. And so on Saturday, I said, Dad, will you take me to the swimming pool? And he said, well, how are you going to pay for it? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he was like, well, it costs $1 to get into the swimming pool. And you have $1. And I was like, "That's not $1, that's a silver dollar, and it's a magic token." And he said, "You have to make a choice." And I agonized about it, like, "Do I give up this thing or do I get the experience? Like, how to do this?" And I just it stuck with me for my entire life, but I made the decision to spend the dollar and have the experience. And I think that that was formative in my lessons about money because it was about what is of value to me and also money as a tool. What is the point of money? And also my personal default mechanism, which is to go for experience. And I've done that
Yeah.
most of my life to, in some ways, my detriment, until I kind of figured some stuff out.
I love that story.
Yeah. It was interesting when you were sharing that. When I would go to see my grandmother, she would also give us, she had a sock full of half dollars, silver half dollars, and she would always give us one. And my dad kept on saying to us, save it, it'll be worth more later. I didn't even understand that concept, so I just spent it as well, just like you. But it is kind of those money stories that we kind of reminisce about when we have a connection to somebody or some particular experience that are often the ones we really remember.
Well, emotional impact is what sets the stage for so much of our lives, right? Like as a storyteller, like I think about this a lot, and it's like these moments that happen in our lives, good or bad, are the things that kind of launch us into a narrative that we end up playing out, whether, until it gets disrupted, either by ourselves or by another experience. So that's for me a lot of what my relationship, excuse me, with money is. It's like that really held sway over me for a long time. And I thought in some ways that money would just fall from the sky, without effort and like management and things like that. And that kind of kicked me in the butt for quite a while until I, like I said, figured some things out.
Yeah, that tends to kick us a lot in the butt. No. So that you kind of given us a prelude to this. You described yourself as once upon a time a broke, starving artist up until your mid-30s or so. How exactly did you get there, and what does broke mean to you specifically?
Okay, well, broke means living like scrap to scrap, paycheck to paycheck, not knowing how to get out from underneath debt that you've acquired, not knowing where your next dollar is going to come from. That's broke. And I lived that life for a really long time. I started out like as a kid in the theater. I wanted to be in musicals and be on the stage and sing and dance and, all the gay stuff. And I decided I went to college, and I studied English and French, which, that's not very useful, but um I went to New York straight out of college to study acting, so I trained professionally doing method acting and all that, and did everything that I could to pursue a career in the arts. My dad's side of the family has a very artistic bent. I had 2 aunts that went to Juilliard, actually.
Oh,
One who
wow.
was a prodigy violinist playing first chair Denver Symphony Orchestra when she was 14 years old. So there's this sort of musical talent that I didn't get, unfortunately, that kind of runs in the family line. Um, so I don't know, maybe that's part of like where my creativity comes from. But I just thought that I would have a career, and I pursued it with all my might. I mean, I didn't slack at all. I did everything that I could. I had some success here and there. I did quite a few commercials, which got me some money, but mostly I was a waiter who wanted to be an actor. And that lasted until my mid-30s when I collided with reality television and, you know, through twists of fate, they kind of, like, took me on, and that ended up creating another career for myself.
Nice. I find it very interesting how you described a broke, starving artist because you couple 2 things. You couple the idea of living paycheck to paycheck, which we know according to data, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, but you also said not knowing where the next dollar was going to come from. There are a lot of people in America who have a good, steady paycheck. They're still living paycheck to paycheck. They just know where the money is coming and they can't make the changes to maybe stop living paycheck to paycheck. But when you don't have the money source, it adds a whole additional layer of anxiety to your being broke and stressed out.
100%, and there are a lot of Americans who are unfortunately living that way as well, you know? You've got your Americans who are poor by, let's say, poor by choice because they haven't learned the tools of how to live below their means, but then you've also got people who are just broke ass poor that just cannot get out from underneath, you know, the grind.
So we're gonna dive into that a little bit more, but please hold that thought, Travis. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to Living Not So Fabulously. We're back talking with Emmy-nominated producer and director Travis Shakespeare. So we've learned from past guests over the years that Hollywood is a lot like our economy in general. There's like 1% in Hollywood who is making all the money, and everybody else is sort of struggling, or at least occasionally a couple times a year they're struggling. So it sounds like that's pretty much the same for behind the camera, including reality TV.
I mean, Hollywood has traditionally had a very large working class, right? So you got your painters and your cable layers, and like these are like blue collar jobs. And they're actually have traditionally been the fundamental, like the foundation of the business that we all see as, you know, the Emmys or the Oscars. But underneath that is what do you call it? Like an iceberg, right? And
Mhm.
underneath the tip of the iceberg is a whole group of people, accountants, lawyers, and so on. That's all changing because of the change in economy that first started with streaming, which changed the whole business model of Hollywood. And now, I mean, LA, like I'm in LA right now, and it's very, very strange. Things are closing up. People are leaving. People don't have jobs. Some of my clients are like just scraping by. I have a number of friends who've had to leave the city, and AI is starting to encroach as well. So we're going to see another massive shift very shortly.
Interesting. So I'm curious. Have you? I'm sure you've seen the news that Trump is now threatening to put 100% tariffs on movies and television created outside of the United States. When you couple that with the changes that are going on in AI and all the other challenges that the industry has dealt with, from COVID-19 to writer strikes and whatnot, what are your thoughts on adding tariffs like that onto the movie and television industries?
Well, I think that I'm not an economist, but 99% of the economists that I've heard from say that tariffs are a really bad idea in general. So I don't think that they worked. The last time we tried this historically, it didn't go well. I don't think that that's the solution. I think that that's more of a political grandstanding, probably, than an actual remedy for the problem.
Yeah. And you've been through these fluctuations in the past. You're one of the veterans in the industry. What is your advice for those of your colleagues who are struggling today to try to make it to the next paycheck or to the next gig?
That is a huge question, and people call me and they're like, "Do you know, is there any work? Can I find a job?" And we've talked about pivoting. I left my career like 3 years ago, and I did like this big kind of resume debrief with ChatGPT and like a career coach to figure out like what are my transferable skills. And sadly, as a producer, like what we do is we just make something out of nothing. We basically just like spin fairy dust and then, somebody's like, "Hey, do you think you could make a show about people surviving in trucks on the ice?" And you're like, "Okay." And then you just go do it. But there's no way to quantify what that is, because it's such a diverse skill set. But the only solution is to create your own IP, your own intellectual property, in my opinion, because if you're able to do that, then the chances of somebody with more money to come in and, like, buy your business is there. If you're just trying to get a job in this environment, I think it's very challenging. That's really sad. That's not doesn't sound very hopeful, but, to be honest with you, we're at a really difficult period, and as I said about, like, the top people squashing the bottom, they're doing that now with everybody, right? So, like, I was hired to do the job of 3, you guys have been hired to do the job of 6, and the next person will be hired to do the job of 13, and at a certain point, it will break.
Mm, yeah, definitely. I have a question for you. When you look back, you said that you went to school for English and French, and you look back on your education. Do you think that your education lent itself to you being this flexible and being able to say, when your ex looked at you and said, "Travis will take the job and he'll do it well." Do you think that your education helped you with that flexibility? And how about the finances of that? How did you m transfer that kind of education into something and maybe not regret or say, I wish I would have spent all that money on college for this particular degree."
Well, I can't say that I haven't had regrets because, like, along the way, there have been times when I've had serious regrets about that. Um, Look, I did a liberal arts education because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I did what I was drawn to. The English came because I love storytelling. I loved Shakespeare, like the real Shakespeare. Um, the French came because of me during the period when I was coming out of the closet, or rather trying to keep myself in the closet. I started running and I thought, well, if I study in France, maybe I can hide who I am and, get away from the pressure that I was under, from family and society and all that stuff. So that widened my education. And yes, I think that creates a great deal of flexibility. The difficulty was that I acquired $40,000 in student loan debt and they told me to consolidate at 9% interest, saying that it was the lowest interest rate that I would ever see in my life. And, thanks, like good old bankers, just helping you out every step of the way. And I carried that debt until I was 40 years old and my dad passed away. And I inherited a very small amount. I'll tell you, I inherited $75,000 because my dad was a school teacher. So all of his pension was in the school pension, not in like a bank or an index fund or whatever. And I paid off the 40 grand and I had like $10,000 in other debt as well. And that was my turning point when, for the first time in my life at 40 years old, I had $22,000, which any 40-year-old listening to this knows that you're quite a ways behind the trend line if you're, just coming into your first 20 grand. So I regretted it, and then I paid 40,000 in interest and 40,000 in principal, so I ended up paying 80,000 for my entire education. I don't think it was worth it. If, like, you put pen to paper, I don't think so, but where it got me in terms of experience and all that, it was worth it. So, I don't know, I still believe in liberal arts education, and I think that with the way the world is turning, having a lot of flexibility, and the ability to be a critical thinker and self-reflective is gonna be hugely important.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I wanna ask you, there's the growing consensus, a couple of surveys have come out that have said, that more and more Americans are thinking that going to college isn't necessarily worth it because it's nearly impossible to get a salary or a wage that's commensurate with the student loans that you're going to assume. When you couple that with the changes in the industry and your advice on, leaning it into creating your own intellectual property, what is your advice for somebody, a young LGBTQ plus student who's thinking about becoming a producer or a writer or somehow wants to get involved in the nitty-gritty of Hollywood?
Even, um, the top people like Bill Gates have come out and said that skills like storytelling are going to remain incredibly important. I've used ChatGPT quite a lot. I've played around with it because 'cause I've had time. It is not a good ideator. It's kind of a good, uh, writing partner, like, if you get stuck and it's like being in a writer's room, like, "Well, what if the guy did this? Well, what if she did that? Well, what if she kissed him?" Like, blah, blah, blah. That's what writers do in a room. So, it's kind of helpful for that. But those kinds of, like, critical thinking skills are gonna be really, really important because the machines, I don't think are gonna get to the point where they're talking about, like, that they're able to just sort of, like, dream things up and make it all happen. I think they're gonna remain as tools for some time. That may be because it's too dangerous to unleash the technology that would allow them to actually ideate, because that is an existential threat to humanity. Um, so I think that's really important. However, my instinct tells me that analog experiences are gonna become premium experiences, both on the entertainment side and just in life in general. So, we're already oversaturated with, content, TikTok, movies, TV. I mean, you don't even know what's out there. There's so much stuff. And the more we go into the virtual world of AR and AI and all this stuff, the more important real world interactions are gonna become, and people are gonna seek out experiences that are, um, maybe narrative driven or exciting or, like, think about, like, when you were a kid, I don't know if anybody does this anymore. Do people still do scavenger hunts?
We did one a couple of years ago in Denver, probably 10 years ago, but it was around drinking, but
Right. Seriously, like, people are gonna want that kind of thing because, I mean, for all we know, we're all gonna have a lot of time on our hands,
Yeah.
and people are gonna need to, like, be interacting with the real world more and more, and the farther away we get from the real world, the more the real world is gonna become a premium. So, what does that all say about college? If you're gonna go to college, I mean, I wouldn't send my kid into computer programming because that looks like it's basically over for human beings, like, but I would go into liberal arts or critical thinking or law or something like that, although law is also gonna go down fast. But to know how to think like a lawyer is gonna be important. And then the other thing is that the analog world is gonna gain, some prestige, like, my partner works in digital advertising. His brother is an HVAC guy. His brother is a millionaire, maybe even a multimillionaire, has his own business and is killing it. My partner is still struggling to climb the ranks of the advertising industry in his 40s, and that place, advertising, is also gonna start getting hit with the AI incursion. So being able to do real things, I think is gonna be really, really important.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. We only have a few moments, but I've gotta ask you this question. Broadway is struggling as well right now, and you're talking about these analog experiences. How do you think that'll benefit Broadway, and how can they maybe adapt to your advice and creating that more immersive experience?
Okay, that's a really complicated question, but what I'll say is this. The reason why Broadway is struggling is because it's working under an old economic model, which is a model of hits. It cannot compete with the rest. That's why everything on Broadway is a movie, because they don't have any money for marketing and advertising, and it costs over $1 million just to get to night one. So it's not going to work. But this is what I said to people that were like worried about AI taking over the movies. Somewhere, somehow, the next Quentin Tarantino is going to make an amazing film using AI that's completely original and will change the way that the world thinks. Broadway is the same thing. People need to start taking smaller risks. This is what happened with independent film in the 90s. There was this big studio onslaught where the studios controlled everything, and then people are like, you know what? I'm just going to go make an independent film. I'm going to make Apocalypse Now. I'm just going to like put my own $1 million into it and take the risk. So it's going to require risk, but out of risk comes great things, right? All the best things have come out of taking great risks, especially with Broadway.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of that. I don't know if it was a director or producer a couple years ago who won that Oscar for like a $10 million movie. And he shared like investors invest in these smaller movies, invest in 1,000 or 10 smaller movies as opposed to just investing in one.
It was the playwriter Will Smith who said, instead of investing $100 million in one movie, invest $10 million in 10 movies and $5 million in 20 movies.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that that's absolutely the way forward for this kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Travis, so much. It was just exciting to have you finally on the show.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to see you guys, and I really appreciate it.
So my favorite takeaway, I think, from this was when Travis basically said the best opportunities come from taking risks. But without a personal safety net, it's really kind of hard to do that. You lose the freedom to take those kinds of risks, and you kind of get stuck where you're at, and you're not able to break out.
Exactly. So one way to sort of do this is with sinking funds. Separate accounts for specific goals. Think of it like having a Christmas club account for every part of your life, with money earmarked for emergencies, some for dreams, others for everyday desires. It keeps everything organized so you can live fully and take chances when you're ready.
Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions or guest suggestions for us, just email us at yfpodcasts@yahooinc.com.
Also, scan the QR code to follow Yahoo Finance Podcast for more videos and expert insights, because when you do, you'll laugh, you'll learn, and discover how to go from carrying $40,000 worth of credit card debt to directing your own financial story. And until next time,
stay fabulous.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.